Katerina Jakob watched the German soldiers flee. Streaming from the east, that's what she was seeing. Allied bombers flew above them. She thought they all might die, and then soon there was the silence of all the SS men. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Katerina Jakob saw red flags flapping in the breeze above the Russian tanks, and she fell upon her knees. And so many different voices in so many different tongues sang the most beautiful song that could ever have been sung. In German, Lithuanian, in Polish and in Dutch, a myriad of melodies has never had been such. In Russian and in Yiddish, Italian and French, emerging from the forests beneath the trench. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht.
Hello and welcome to Revolutionary Socialist Review for December 16th, 2021. Our first topic tonight, 6 dead in Edwardsville, Illinois after Amazon warehouse collapse. Now, this was a pretty harrowing event. At least 6 people are dead and more injured after the partial collapse of an Amazon warehouse in Edwardsville, Illinois, on the night of December 10th. As of the morning of December 12th, search and rescue efforts were ongoing through the rubble of the facility and expected to continue through December 14th. At least one person was evacuated by helicopter the night of the collapse. Reports indicate as many as 100 workers may have been inside the DL-14 facility when it was struck by an EF3 tornado around 8:35 p.m. I guess EF3 is a category of tornado. It's not the worst tornado I've heard about. So I think it usually goes up to 5 or 6 or something like that. But EF3 was certainly enough to collapse this shabby Amazon warehouse. At 5 p.m., the National Weather Service had issued a tornado watch for portions of Illinois and Missouri, including Edwardsville, which sits less than 30 minutes across the Missouri River from St. Louis. At 8 p.m., this was upgraded to a tornado warning for the area, meaning that an active tornado had been observed. A series of twisters touched down in the area, destroying homes and buildings that evening and leaving at least one other person dead. Despite this danger, operations continued at the delivery station where packages are prepared and loaded out for delivery. Far from shutting down or limiting the work, the warehouse was in the process of a shift change when the building collapsed, which has complicated the process of accounting for all the workers. Earlier this year, the Strategic Organizing Center released a report on their analysis of worker injury rates at Amazon as compared with others in the warehouse industry. They found that workers at Amazon warehouses are not only injured more frequently than in non-Amazon warehouses, they are also injured more severely. In 2020, for every 100 Amazon warehouse workers, there were 5.9 serious injuries requiring the worker to either miss work entirely or be placed on light or restricted duty. This rate is nearly 80% higher than the serious injury rate for all other employers in the warehouse industry in 2020. Amazon's gargantuan logistical apparatus, which enables it to make billions of dollars, is held together by workers that the corporation sees not as human beings, but as just more disposable pieces of machinery.
These are the kinds of realities that get more prevalent as the climate crisis intensifies, because global warming is always a factor to consider in these kinds of extreme weather stories. It's not like global warming is the sole factor, but it's always a contributor.
Yeah.
Amazon is going to continue sacrificing more of its workers as the years and decades go by, and as the weather risks get worse. I wasn't even expecting, like, intuitively for global warming to be a major facet of these developments in Amazon's increasingly necropolitical operations. But as we keep concluding, as we investigate these kinds of things, as we investigate global capitalist oppression, everything is connected. Everything about this story intertwines. It comes back to capital.
Yeah. And apparently, Amazon is the worst of the bunch. And they are a tremendous warehouse operation all over the world. Because they are so voracious for profit, even at the expense of their workers, this will continue to go on. This warehouse was obviously a shabby affair because whatever it is, 3 tornado is not really that significant of a tornado. But because this Amazon warehouse was so flimsily constructed in the first place, a big problem with all this is America's lax laws and regulations for how these things are built. They should be built, as in most other countries, they are built to withstand this kind of a tornado or to get very minimal damage. Instead, this fucking thing collapsed and killed workers. The shabby construction that's very prevalent all over America is a big part of this. So there's that. There's the global warming aspect of this. There's the fact that it should have been shut down if they were having a tornado alert like that. There's a lot of different aspects of this that are very troubling. But obviously in the coming months, we'll find out more and we'll report it as we hear it and discuss it. The practical justice of Marxism's vision for a workers' state by Rainer Shea.
Marxism acknowledges both that the state is ultimately disposable as a tool for enforcing justice, and acknowledges that the state is going to be necessary to continue utilizing for as long as capitalist restoration is a possibility. The analysis of Marx and Engels concludes that after the socialist revolution happens, it's going to need to build a worker state that continues to serve the function of suppressing bourgeois power, of facilitating the transition away from capitalism's remnants in the bourgeois productive system until full communism is achieved, until the bourgeois productive system itself no longer exists. Only then can the state be allowed to wither away. Only then can we actually consider giving up the state. But the anarchists have an idealistic way of approaching this. Emma Goldman argues that every kind of state, whether it's Nazi, fascist, liberal, Bolshevik, is always going to be incurably opposed to change. That's what Emma Goldman writes. But there's a difference between the socialist state and the capitalist, the fascist state. The socialist state was created with the intent of withering away when the conditions allowed for this. But the anarchists are excessively cynical about this. They see the very existence of the state as incompatible with the idea of abolishing the state. And we need to repudiate this idea that the state always comes with this risk. Obviously, we should hold ourselves to an appropriate standard as revolutionaries. Obviously, we shouldn't allow for the revolutionary model to deviate from this this guideline of having the state wither away. But that shows that we have a responsibility. We shouldn't run away from that responsibility by concluding that it can just be solved by trying to abolish the state in one fell swoop.
Yeah, this Emma Goldman's remark is absurd on the face of it. Of course, we have the benefit of 100 years more experience than she had when she wrote that. But take the example of China, for example. China has made radical changes in the character of its economic system and political system several times since 1949, but most importantly in 1978, when it shifted from a Stalinist, mostly collectivized economy to a Leninist NEP style economy. That was a major change. That would have taken a revolution, a political overthrow of the state to accomplish under capitalism. That kind of change. But China made that change. And since then, as China has advanced farther and farther towards socialism, towards more advanced socialism. It has made other less significant, but still significant changes, making it at least for now, more able to advance the workers' cause through different measures that it did not used to use. So the Emma Goldman's just absurd, you know. She was a nice old lady, and you know, she had her place in the movement. She did some good things. She did some really terrible things, but she was definitely wrong on that. So
yeah, and the anarchists would just argue, come back at what you just said, and argue that China's changes have simply been a step in the wrong direction, that China's embrace of markets is further proof that Marxism-Leninism is counter-revolutionary and so dishonest, because anarchists don't even have a stake, don't even rightly have a stake in this debate. They're not even part of the communist movement.
well, regardless, it doesn't really it doesn't really matter what they say. It doesn't matter whether they say that the changes that China made are good or bad. You and I know that they were necessary, and they were good for raising 800 million workers up out of poverty, workers and their families. But nonetheless, even if we were to argue none of that, even if we were to argue that it was wrong what they did, which it wasn't, it's still a massive change that a capitalist state could not have done without a fucking political revolution, an overthrow of the state. That's the point. So Emma Goldman is wrong. They make these changes. They make them whenever it is necessary, and dozens of other socialist countries around the world have gone through making such changes as well. So it's just an absurd thing that they would even argue that she was right on this level. She was not right. Okay, next, Talon Anvil. Wow, what a name. Talon Anvil, you know, a talon and an anvil. Talon Anvil, U.S. military unit exposed for role in massive Syrian civilian deaths. Now, this Talon Anvil is a special unit of the U.S. Army, and it has been put together basically as the targeters for bombing raids. Damning new information has come to light about systemic disregard for civilian casualties as U.S. airstrikes on Syria. Reporting by the New York Times revealed the existence of a shadowing U.S. military unit called Talon Anvil, responsible for identifying targets for airstrikes. Talon Anvil directed over 112,000 bombs and missiles between 2014 and 2019, ostensibly targeting ISIS, but in many cases only murdering Syrian civilians. The new report is related to a previous article that showed how the U.S. military covered up the deaths of 64 Syrian civilians. But the numbers are far, far greater than that of civilians being murdered haphazardly by this Talon Anvil. The investigation also discloses that various intelligence officials expressed alarm about how Talon Anvil lacked oversight and that top commanders swept concerns under the rug. targeting decisions could be made by low-ranking members of the unit, and Talon Anvil frequently attacked on the basis of questionable intelligence without confirmation about the presence of non-combatants. Every year of the unit's operations saw an increase in civilian casualties. Top military brass like General Stephen J. Townsend ignored the mounting death toll, essentially sanctioning those killings by keeping Talon Anvil in active operation. In 2016, General Townsend took overall command of the US war against ISIS and shifted tactics to speed up the strikes. To achieve this, he gave low-level commanders on the ground authority over targeting decisions. Townsend now is the head of the US military Africa Command, AFRICOM. So he got a big promotion for murdering so many civilians. In a 2016 speech, President Obama claimed in reference to Syria, with our extraordinary technology, we're conducting the most precise air campaign in history. And so when there are allegations of civilian casualties, we take them very seriously. We work to find the facts, to be transparent, to hold ourselves accountable for doing better in the future. But in reality, though Talon Anvil's operation, throughout Talon Anvil's operations, the US military routinely killed innocent civilians with impunity and neglected any accountability for such suffering. The United States image as global enforcer of human rights and democracy is exposed as an utter farce by the true cost of the war on Syria. And now if we take all American wars over the last few decades, this is just one little snippet, one little item that the New York Times uncovered of one targeting unit. The fact is that this is a way of war for the American imperialists. Killing civilians is an important part of their operations. They do it deliberately, they do it knowingly. They are war criminals on a massive, massive scale. And when we finally get to the point where we catch these criminal culprits, the Obamas, the Trumps, the Bidens, and all of their underlings, I'm personally for execution, public execution in the most horrid manner that we can imagine. But that's just me. I'm a little bit more, some people, say, we should just put them in jail or whatever. Even if we just put them in jail, that would be a huge, for the rest of their lives, of course, that would be a huge, huge advantage over where we are now with these kinds of gruesome criminals killing civilians over and over and over again with the double tap, Obama's double tap, where he would drop a bomb and then wait 20 minutes and go and drop another bomb on the same site after all the first responders got there, the firemen and the police and medical personnel and so forth, and bomb all them too. Now tell me that is not deliberate. That is deliberate targeting of civilians. These are the most gruesome criminals to ever have existed on the planet, in my personal opinion.
There's an infamous moment from US media reporting on the Syrian war from recent years, where there was this pundit from, I think, MSNBC, who was ridiculing Tulsi Gabbard's position on Syria. And I think that's what set them off, Tulsi Gabbard. And they were saying that that something to the effect of how we need to stand in solidarity with the U.S. forces that are pushing back against Assad's forces in Syria. And that was a blatant factual error, a blatant mistaken part of their analysis, because the U.S. has not actually been fighting Assad's forces. They're officially fighting ISIS. But I think that this goes to show how U.S. media pundits can get away with statements like this, because ultimately it doesn't matter too much whether the U.S. forces are supposed to be fighting ISIS or supposed to be fighting Assad, because the U.S. is in Syria due to a proxy war that the U.S. started in that country by funding and training and arming terrorist groups. And the U.S. is either way killing Syrian civilians. They would still be killing Syrian civilians if they were fighting against Assad's forces. And obviously the U.S. is involved in Syria in violation of international law, violating the sovereignty of the Syrian state. So it doesn't even matter. The facts don't even matter to the warmongers. All they want is the destruction of Syria.
Well, the fact is that they have been fighting Assad's forces, and they're not Assad's forces. Assad is the president of a country duly elected, and that country has an army, the Syrian, Syrian army, and these people, these Americans and their allies have been fighting Assad's forces deliberately, and yet they deny that they do so. They've denied it. They've denied it over and over and over again. The official policy of the American state is that they are there only to fight ISIS. That's the official policy. Yet, in fact, they've been aiding ISIS. They even dropped plane loads of aid to ISIS. They've helped in moving ISIS forces from one part of the country to another. They're helping ISIS, and they're fighting the Syrian Arab Republic. That's what they're doing, and they've been doing that since since 2011, and probably even before, in a surreptitious CIA kind of way. So that's, to me, it's refreshing to hear pundits actually tell the truth.
I was seeing
for a
headlines
change.
ridicule that pundit for supposedly being mistaken. But now I see the context. Now I see they were actually telling the quiet part out loud, which is even worse.
Yeah. I don't know who these pundits are, but I guess they're getting more bold with the truth. We'll put it that way. So anyway, that's Talon Anvil for you. It's a gruesome kind of name too, Talon and Anvil with talons. Anti-communist atrocity propaganda is fascism's greatest weapon. Rainer Shea.
The story of how anti-communist narratives have proliferated within Eastern Europe is a really odious one. It began when the Nazis started stirring up rumors about Soviet atrocities in the Ukraine in the early 1930s. And according to the analysis of Mario Sousa, this was intended as a humanitarian propaganda campaign to start laying the narrative groundwork for Nazi Germany's planned invasion of Russia. They were trying to convince the world that Ukrainians were under threat from the evil Joseph Stalin, and that this therefore required intervention. But obviously, the Nazis did not care at all about the well-being of the Ukrainian people. They saw Slavs as subhuman groups that needed to be eradicated for the fulfillment of the Aryan race's Lebensraum. And they acted upon this belief by slaughtering millions of Slavs. And that started the trend we've seen during this last century of imperialists using humanitarianism to create a sense of genuineness for their fake image as peacemakers, as upholders of justice. You see this with the United States all the time, where they claim to be for the well-being of Syrians and wanting to stand up to the supposedly evil Assad, while at the same time murdering Syrian civilians in cold blood constantly. And I see that's why I see Nazi Germany as providing a kind of innovation in imperialist propaganda that the US then picked up by spreading this propaganda about the so-called Holodomor to tens of millions of newspaper readers. And there are parallel lies to this that have come from Poland, from the Polish fascists, who have worked to consistently paint Stalin as to blame for the miscarriages of justice that were carried out by the Soviet forces, by the Soviet justice system, when in reality, the miscarriages of justice that happened under the Soviet system were the direct result of corrupt fascist infiltrators with ties to the Nazis who came in, deceived Stalin, and deliberately convicted a whole bunch of innocent people just to make the Soviet Union look bad. At least that's what was my understanding of their motive. And at the same time, of course, the fascists have exaggerated the supposed Soviet atrocities within Poland. So now you have fascist regimes in both Poland and the Ukraine that are justifying their actual human rights abuses by constantly talking about human rights abuses that supposedly happened almost a century ago.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, that anti-communist propaganda that started in the 30s, after World War II, it became ubiquitous throughout the Western world, throughout the so-called free world, to use this anti-communist propaganda. They didn't care that it was made based on lies. They didn't care that it was pure propaganda. You look at almost every book that was written, every speech given, or talk on a talk show given by these anti-communist propagandists, and all of their anti-communist propaganda is rooted in those same lies that began in the 30s against people like the people in Ukraine, for instance. Yeah, it's terrible, terrible stuff. Next on the list, the United States is using Nazis in Ukraine to provoke war with Russia. So, this is this is a quite extraordinary thing here, what they're doing. If you listen to the corporate media in the United States, you may believe that lies that say Russia is preparing to invade Ukraine. In reality, it is the United States, led by then Vice President Joe Biden, that conducted a coup to replace the elected president of Ukraine in 2014, and has been training and arming Nazis to attack the ethnically Russian Donbass region in eastern Ukraine ever since, including bombings and missile attacks and so forth. And this is on residential housing areas. You know, there is daily violence against civilians and basic infrastructure. The Biden administration is escalating this aggression and trying to blame Russia with the support of the same corporate media that defended US attacks on Iraq, Libya, and Syria. To clear the fog on this misinformation campaign, Bruce Gagnon of the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space speaks about what is actually happening in Ukraine and the role of the US in the growing risk of war with Russia. And Bruce Gannon speaks in this video that we will have a link to under this video when it goes up. So want to invite all of our watchers to watch this great video. Bruce Gannon, who's been active for quite a long time. I didn't know him, but my roommate at the time, like 15 years ago, was working with him constantly in Veterans for Peace. So he's a pretty good guy. Anyway, I want to urge all of you to watch this video. We'll have the link up, just like we'll have the link for all the articles that we talk about tonight.
Yeah, this is a new version of the operation that the imperialists carried out during the 1930s, because we so often forget that the Nazis were not some kind of innately, fundamentally anti-American presence. They were, their rise was made possible by U.S. capital. It was made possible by with the complicity of the other imperialist powers, because Germany was and is an imperialist power, and the imperialists so often feed off of each other. They had intersecting interests, and the Nazis had the agenda of exterminating communists, which the other imperialist powers obviously weren't opposed to. So they let the Nazis get in, and then they aided the Nazis in the coming years by putting forth their false propaganda narratives about the Soviet Union. I'm going to have to really look into the details of media coverage about Hitler around that time, but I'm guessing that there was a degree of apologia for the Nazis at that time, especially considering that William Randolph Hearst, the media emperor, was essentially a direct ally of Hitler's.
Yeah.
There was clearly a shameful period where the Americans were quietly or probably explicitly cheering on for the Nazis, like how they're cheering on for the new generation of Nazis in Ukraine.
Yeah, coincidentally, just a few days ago, I was reading an article that spoke exactly about that, about the media attention to Hitler and support for Hitler from some of the major media in the United States during the late 1930s, during the mid to late 1930s. Hearst, of course, was a very important aspect of that, but it wasn't just Hearst. It was all of the major media in the United States promoting Hitler, just like the major the major corporations in the United States were working with Hitler's industry. So yeah, the United States is a lot more explicitly guilty than we are usually led to believe here post World War II. It's a period that they hope we forget. Most of the people now who ever read that stuff are dead. So, you know, they hope that we just forget it, but I'm not going to forget it. You're not going to forget it. We will keep it alive. Let's see, what do we have next here? That was United States. Oh, terror, destabilization, genocide, India's imperialist proxy role. Rainer Shea.
India is a country that anti-imperialists should pay attention to more because it has a parallel role to Israel, just in a different region from Israel. Like Israel, it's a colonizing power while not being imperialist in a socioeconomic sense. Neither Israel nor India have the economic leverage to act as imperialist powers, but they are colonizing the Palestinians and the Kashmiris in India's area. And like Israel, India acts as a proxy warfare force on behalf of Washington. India was recently accused by Pakistan's military of supporting terrorist groups within Pakistan. India obviously denied this, but who are you more likely to believe, the victim or the perpetrator? Because India is obviously the perpetrator. India is in the wrong in this geopolitical situation, and India has been known to engage in proxy warfare destabilization campaigns within Sri Lanka by carrying out a counter-revolutionary coup within a major Marxist, formerly Marxist guerrilla organization, and then using that guerrilla group as a bludgeon for committing atrocities that were then used to create a humanitarian narrative that India used to intervene within Sri Lanka. Now Sri Lanka is a major point in China's Belt and Road Initiative, so we're going to have to see how India is potentially used to sow further chaos within Sri Lanka. These are the kinds of operations we need to pay attention to. Covert, hidden destabilization campaigns, terror campaigns that the imperialists and their puppet states are going to vigorously deny, but that need to be seen as real.
Yeah, India hasn't always played this role. It's actually quite recent. It's under the direction of Modi, President Modi, that this has come about, or Prime Minister Modi, I'm sorry, that this has come about. India is now a major adversary to China. And India and China are two wonderful examples of a very important lesson, and that is in 1948, India becomes independent. 1949, China wins its liberation. China and India were roughly equal in their economic development, roughly equal. Now, in 2021, China is tremendously ahead of India. And it's because, why? Because China became a communist country, because China had a socialist economy, whereas India had a capitalist economy. Some people think of India for most of that time as a socialist economy because it had, for several years, they had social democratic governments that nationalized some industries and so forth and so on, but it was not socialist. No social democratic government ever in the history of humankind, or in the last 100 years since social democrats have come to power, has ever created a socialist country. So, but today under Prime Minister Modi, and Modi really is a fascist. And under Modi, India has become a great friend to American imperialism and a great enemy to any country that is the enemy of American imperialism. Okay, next on the list, the let's see, where are we? Oh, almost read the wrong one. Every option is on the table. US prepping for Libya-style intervention in Ethiopia. Now this, while many in the Horn of Africa clearly need help, the Biden administration's idea of help might not be exactly what they had in mind. Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Amid a bloody civil conflict and the increasing great power competition between the United States and China, there are a number of alarming signs that Ethiopia will become the next Libya, an African nation where the US intervenes militarily under the pretext of stopping and impeding genocide. A considerable military buildup is now underway. Last week, the US military announced it was sending over 1,000 National Guard members to nearby Djibouti. This is on top of the special operations forces already sent in November. Perhaps most notably, a government official told CNN that the aircraft carrier USS Essex, along with 2 other large amphibious vehicles, was streaming towards the Horn of Africa and standing by for further orders. For weeks, the drums of war have been growing louder in our nation's media. Ethiopia's civil war is a problem US troops can help solve. Admiral James Stavridis, former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, wrote in Bloomberg and in the Washington Post. Sending peacekeepers to the pivotal nation of East Africa wouldn't be popular domestically, but may be the only way to stop the conflict, he added. Meanwhile, former Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Jendai Fraser, argued that the West should establish a no-fly zone across Ethiopia, a country of 115 million people and twice the size of France. When it comes to Ethiopia, he said, of the USAID, when it comes to Ethiopia, said head of USAID, Samantha Power, one of the architects of the US intervention in Libya, every option is on the table. Using a paraphrase that has long been understood to be a threat of war. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken also refused to rule out sending troops into Ethiopia when directly asked. Given its bloody record, the talk of a humanitarian invasion has many Ethiopians worried. The US is looking for a pretext for military intervention in Ethiopia. The playbooks of interventions in Iraq, Syria, Yugoslavia, and Libya are being referred to. Dr. Berhanu Tai, an Ethiopian physician and member of Global Ethiopian Advocacy Nexus, told Mintpress. The military buildup comes on the back of economic actions already taken. In September, President Joe Biden labeled Ethiopia a national security threat as he imposed sanctions upon government officials. Last month, the US also placed sanctions on Eritrea, whose troops are also heavily involved in the fight against the Tigray People's Liberation Front. The White House is currently withholding over $250 million of aid from Ethiopia and has ended the country's special trade status under US law, which had allowed it to export goods freely to the United States. Critics say that this could have the effect of crashing the already shaky economy, threatening over 1 million jobs. Earlier this week, a number of Western governments, including the US, signed a statement condemning the Ethiopian government for its human rights violations while fighting the TPLF, which they did not censure. The State Department is reportedly considering labeling the actions in Ethiopia a genocide, a word that would have considerable implications given NATO's self-declared right to protect doctrine, whereby it claims it has the right to intervene anywhere in the world to stop ethnic cleansing. Bordering Eritrea and Sudan, Tigray is Ethiopia's northernmost region, home to 7 million people. Although ethnic Tigrayans constitute only 6% of Ethiopia's population, they play an outsized role in public life as the TPLF controlled the country between 1991 and 2018, when popular protests forced them out of power. Tigrayans were near ubiquitous in the upper ranks of the country's military and intelligence services and were greatly overrepresented among its economic elite. For this, Dr. Tayi, for Dr. Tayi amounted to no less than a system of informal apartheid that was ignored by most of the West. Mintpress also contacted a spokesperson for the TPLF, but did not receive a response. Since coming to power in 2018, the new Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, has moved against the TPLF in a set of changes that supporters see as much needed reforms to reduce corruption and the TPLF's grip over public life, but opponents see as overstepping his mandate as the persecution of an ethnic minority. The spark for war came in November 2020 when Ahmed attempted to remove military officers belonging to the TPLF from their command. The TPLF fought back, attacking Northern Command headquarters in Mekele, the capital of the Tigray region. Later that month, the TPLF forces also shelled Asmara, the capital of Eritrea. As the TPLF reportedly have drawn closer to the capital, Addis Ababa, a number of the country's sports stars, including long-distance running hero Haile Gebrselassie, have volunteered for government military service. Thus, the conflict is ultimately a struggle between two political forces for the control of Ethiopia's economy. Yet this is not at all how corporate media have presented the issue, preferring instead to frame it as Ethiopian and Eritrean governments exterminating an ethnic minority group. CNN, for example, wrote, Eritrean troops aren't just working hand in glove with the Ethiopian government, assisting in a merciless campaign against the Tigrayan people. In some pockets, they're fully in control and waging a reign of terror that bears the hallmarks of genocide and has potential to destabilize the wider Horn of Africa region. The New York Times has followed a similar line in much of its reporting. Embedding themselves with the TPLF, they described their companions as a scrappy force of local Tigrayan recruits that had, against all odds, scored a cascade of battlefield victories against the Ethiopian military, one of Africa's strongest.
There's a lot to say about this. Well, you said that India is not the friend of that modern India is not the friend of any anti-imperialist country, but I recently learned something surprising about that. Apparently, India, along with China and Russia, is one of the countries that stood in solidarity with Ethiopia amid its targeting by U.S. hybrid warfare, which goes to show just how brazen Washington's war against Ethiopia has been.
Yeah.
This is a despicable series of acts that have manufactured potentially the world's largest famine. And now Washington is seeking to exploit this famine that they've created by seeking precedent for a military invasion. What we need to do is point out the false atrocity narratives that are being put forth, and use that to point out the hypocrisy, the dishonesty, the bad faith nature of Washington's attempts to intervene, which is why I think it's important for us to parse out exactly which atrocity stories are verifiably false, which claims lack evidence. This is something that I'll have to continue looking into.
Hindutva, the ideology for counter-revolution in the global South, by Rainer Shea.
I see Hindutva fascism as especially tailored to the task of carrying out counter-revolution in an exploited country, because its entire purpose is to divide an entire country based on racial and religious distinctions. It was born out of the parallel ideologies of Hitler and Mussolini. It's an ideology of ethnic cleansing, of believing that the northern Hindus, because they have ethnic ties to the Aryans, apparently, are superior to the southern Indian Hindus. A strange, totally arbitrary distinction. And it puts forth this narrative that India can only be optimal if it cleanses itself of the impure elements, of the non-Hindu elements, if it recognizes the Aryans or Aryan adjacent ethnicity as the superior ethnicity, if it purges the country of communists. Communists are listed as the number 3 biggest enemy of India, according to the guidebook of the RSS, the Hindutva paramilitary wing. They are the longest running fascist movement in the world that was cultivated out of the Hindu nationalism that the British occupation helped foster. So in that way, they're a part of the legacy of colonialism. And India won't truly be free from colonialism until Hindutva is defeated, until the caste system, which Hindutva is obviously based around, is defeated, and the nations within India that are oppressed by the Hindutva regime are given self-determination. Then socialism can be built on the Indian subcontinent.
Wow. I wonder if Modi has any connection to the Hindutva, because it sounds a lot like what Modi has been implementing and fostering. Modi, since he became prime minister, has stroked this kind of racism, in particular against Muslims, but I would imagine also against the Indians from the southern part of the country that are all Black. So I'd like to look further into this. I'd never heard of this Hindutva before, but it really sounds a lot like Modiism to me.
Yeah, I first heard about it from these Indians, these Indian Marxists who have been my Facebook friends, and they've been posting about, for instance, murders committed against Muslim children by people they described as Hindutva fascists. So apparently this overarching ideology of racism, of religious exclusionism, born out of the same vein as Mussolini's fascist theory, is central to the ideology driving Modi's regime.
Yeah. The Aryans in this case were Persians, because actually on several different times, forces from Persia invaded India and took over India. So those are the Aryans that they talk about. They're Persian, basically. So, wow, very interesting, Rainer, very interesting. Okay, that's it for us tonight. Unless you have anything else to add, anything more, then we're done. We're kaput. This is it. So until next week, I want to thank you, Rainer, as always, and thank the viewers and listeners to our show. Please return next week when we'll have another episode of Revolutionary Socialist Review. And until then, I bid you a sweet adieu.